Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Hana Jung. Hana is a serial entrepreneur and startup advisor with expertise spanning digital marketing, app development, luxury hospitality, technology, and design. She has 10 years of brand strategy experience on major brands like Samsung, Clarins, and Rolex. Now, Hana is the founder and chief connector of Reboot Experiences, which helps conscious leaders to rapidly gain clarity and confidence to charge into their next big chapter. Hana spends a lot of her time barefoot in paradise locations like Bali, which I would normally be very jealous of. But because of the pandemic, I've been barefoot for most of the last year. So who needs Bali? Ladies and gentlemen, Hana Jung. Hana, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Francisco. Definitely agree with you on the barefoot all the time.
No,
Now you can do whatever you want.
I absolutely understand the concept barefoot luxury. I went to the Maldives a few years ago. The first and last time I went to the Maldives. I'm still paying for it, I think. And it wasn't particularly luxurious as holiday resorts go, but you could definitely spend the whole time you were there barefoot, because the whole thing was set up for that. And I've tried implementing that in my day-to-day life here in Barcelona. And I once left. I went swimming in the ocean during the winter, and then I said, what if I just don't put my shoes back on? How far can I get barefoot? And I actually managed to walk for a good 40 odd minutes. And I think I only put my shoes back on when I was getting into the underground, to the metro. But it was a bit dicey. I have to keep looking for broken glass.
I'm sure you got some interesting looks along the way.
Oh, yes, but it's also true that until not that long ago, it was legal to be naked in Barcelona. So
Oh.
a few people actually took advantage of that. And if you Google after we're done, naked man of Barcelona, you're gonna find a guy. It's an old guy. I think he's dead now, but it's like an older guy who made a point of walking up and down the Ramblas naked, and he tattooed, like, it looks like a black speedo that he tattooed. So if you see him from the back, it's like, is he naked? Is he not? And
Oh my
and
God.
when you look at the pictures, because he's naked, they blurred his genitalia, but it's a very long blur. So you're looking at that, it was like, why is that blurred all the way to his knee? I mean, this is so, so yeah, he was fit.
Gotta respect him though. He had the rules and he was just playing to those rules and that
Yeah.
creativity. Gotta respect that game.
Yeah, it's a shame. I don't miss the fact that they changed that law and now it's not legal to walk around naked in Barcelona again. But it was funny that when they were talking about changing the law, the protest against it was, I think, 50 or 60 people got the bicing, which is the public bicycles in Barcelona, naked. And I'm thinking,
Oh God.
I mean, that's just not fair to everyone that's going to come after them and use those bicycles.
Absolutely. Oh my God. That'd be really funny to see that in person.
Yeah, I'm not sure funny is the. I saw a little bit of it. It was just next to where my office was. Funny was not really the word in my head.
I think I'm from New York, so I see a lot of like strange behavior that I don't even notice anymore after all these years. I mean, I'm not in New York now, but whenever I see there's like the homeless would use like the bicycle racks and do like spinning classes like on the racks. They would just like bicycle backwards and do like a spin class, like exercise aerobics. I was like, that's really creative. So
Yeah,
every city has.
Barcelona has, or I'm not sure if it's Spain or if it's just Barcelona, but they have some strange rules when it comes to things like homeless people. So it's essentially almost impossible to move someone from a place where they're living in, regardless if the place they're living in was theirs to begin with or not. So if you go away for a long holiday, like you're traveling around the world, you live in different places. If one of those places was in Barcelona and someone got into your home and lived there for a month or two, it'll be very difficult to get them out. That's just how the law is here. And there was a friend of mine, and in front of his house there was there was a garage. It was like a double door garage in a building, and a guy who used to be homeless set up shop there. And when my friend moved there, it was just, he had some cardboard boxes and he was sleeping rough, and we thought, okay, well, probably he's not going to be there for very long. But then he started sort of building up his house, and at some point he had books, he had some Bruce Lee pictures on the walls, he got a stereo somewhere, and he put plants up so he got some privacy. So all you could see was just like this really nice sort of shelter with plants and art everywhere, and it was like, but isn't this the garage? Like, how did they get in here? So yeah. But don't make one of your seasonal homes Barcelona, is what I'm saying.
Oh, sorry.
Have I lost you there again? Hannah?
Hello.
Hi, I can hear you. Your image seems to be frozen, but I can hear you. Hello?
Hello.
I can hear you fine. Hold on.
I really apologize. Francisco, can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you fine.
Okay, I think I can hear you now.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. Like, I'm in the jungle and I'm right by the router right now, and
It's fine.
yeah.
It's fine. It's not. I can always see. This is the problem. The only problem with that is that I tend to, I upload the video of these things, right? So if it happens 7 times, it's just gonna stay like that. I'm not gonna bother going in and cut. I'm not Brian, right? Who had Brian,
Mine is like a
Oh no,
perfectionist.
mine is like, listen, if you want to watch this whole thing and there's some glitches in the middle, tough luck. The sound, I'll edit. The video, I can't be bothered. Like every time something glitches, going, okay, I'll cut this 10 seconds. But yeah, but there's a chat in the corner, so if anything happens, that you can still access that chat. I actually just sent 2 messages there. So
Yeah.
so anyway, I've got a quote that I think you're gonna like. So this is from Jerry Seinfeld, right?
Okay.
And he was talking about business. I think it was with Alec Baldwin, and then Alec was asking him, because Seinfeld, if he wanted, he could have a massive business empire on the basis of his sitcom alone, not even counting everything else. And the reason he said that he wasn't interested is he said, um, you know, do you want to be on a surfboard or do you want to be on a yacht? Because I want to be on a surfboard. I want to be right on the water. That's what I like. The yacht thing, I mean, some people like to have a yacht so they can tell other people, look at my yacht, but I don't. I want to be on the surfboard. So I think that means a lot more to you than it means to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Or better yet, have the yacht that takes you surfing. I always say, don't choose both.
Yes, true. But I remember that I came across that, and I don't remember if came across that before I came across you. But I thought, given that you love surfing and you worked in a yacht and you developed a yachting, was it a yachting staffing app? Was that it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I know it's definitely like a weird life trajectory to have done that like part of my life, and then now I'm like working fully remote for the last 7 years, and building several businesses on the road. So yeah, it's quite a leap. But then even before like yachting, I was like in New York, so I like to mix things up. I sometimes just do it for the stories, but also just because it sounds fun.
But and a lot of the things that you are doing now, I think, feel significantly less weird than they did a year ago, because remote work was a very strange thing that not many people did, a couple of years ago. And now I think I'll be very surprised if the option of doing a part of any work remote is not something that a lot of companies are having to put up with, even if they don't want to, because people realize that actually 8 to 10 hours in the office, having to commute every single day, not my ideal life.
Yeah. And I think people are going to start using it as like an incentive. Like, back in the day, like startups were like, oh, unlimited vacation. They're also going to be like optional
Mm.
remote work. So, yeah, I think it's definitely people are going to ask for more freedom, I think, moving forward. So, yeah.
So one thing you might remember this from the very first time we talked, but you and I met because you appeared on Brian Miller's podcast. Brian Miller, who is the only person I've had twice on my podcast, and he reached out and he said, I think you really need to speak to her. And then I looked at what you're up to, and I said, are you sure you didn't send her to the wrong podcaster? Because almost everyone I talk to is either a speaker or a storyteller or someone who works in more directly with that type of stuff in marketing. But I believe that the reason why he thought that you and I should talk was because, again, it might just be a case of semantics, but pretty much the work you do now is you are helping people rewrite their story, essentially.
Exactly.
Mm.
That's a beautiful way to put it, Francisco. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's these stories that we tell ourselves that keep us stuck and keep us small. Like a lot of these like limiting beliefs and subconscious blocks stem from these stories that we keep telling ourselves. It's usually in the form of like a repeating thought, like, oh, I'm not good enough, or oh, I have this great idea. Oh, but then everyone else is doing it. Or like, this would be cool, but oh, I don't know what I'm doing. Like there's these like constant like negative feedback loops that's happening in your brain. So what I do is like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I help them identify where the tape is stuck and then have them choose a different story,
Mm.
rewrite their past story or reframe their past story in order to move forward with a little bit more clarity.
So before we jump into the work you're doing at with the Reboot experiences, I heard you talk about some things that had more to do with you and how you've done that for you. And if I understand correctly, one of the most important things, one of the most important processes you had to go through was learning how to let go of the stories you were carrying from your family, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as a Asian American, a child of immigrants, and very timely with what's happening with the world right now, I realized that there's two different stories that I had to let go of. One being the stories that I inherited from my parents about success, about how to conduct myself in the world, about money, about all of the different aspects that immigrant parents who had given up everything to allow myself and my brothers to succeed. Like they had very high expectations. So, on the one hand, there's that personal story that I had to carry and learn to release. And then on the other hand, there's another story, which is this model minority. You got to do what's expected of you from being. I was born in the US, but even now, like systemic racism exists, and people look at me. They're like, "Oh, like your English is so good. Like, where are you from?" I'm like, "I'm from Texas." Like, and like dealing with that and how to work in a very like in my previous life, I worked in tech and marketing, and yachting is also very male dominated as well. So I found myself continuously in situations very male dominated, also very white. Growing up in Texas, as you can imagine, is very white. So I've also had to learn to let go of the stories of people's expectations of me. I didn't choose the normal career trajectory, and also to dive deeper into spirituality and a little bit more like choosing my own path is very different even among the Asian American community. So when people meet me, they're like, how the hell did you do it? It's to be intentional about how I remove those two stories.
One question that comes to my mind when you talk about that type of stuff is, at what point did so I don't know if you even use this type of language when you think about this stuff, right? So the language, the stories we tell ourselves, but whatever you call it, was there a point where something happened where you thought, okay, well, this stuff I've been carrying, I have to drop it? Was there any point, any sort of turning point, or anything that happened that made you realize that that this was happening and this was dragging you down?
Yeah, I think it happened at that aha moment happened at different times for the two different stories. So with the family stories that I was carrying, it it happened kind of gradually over time, but then the big moment for me was losing my uncle to cancer when I was quite young, and I realized, and losing several, like I used to ice skate as well, and my skating partner like committed suicide at a very young age as well. So I experienced a lot of loss at such a young age that the takeaway that I got from that was like, you know what, like life actually is short. Doesn't matter if you're old, it doesn't matter if you're young, it doesn't matter what race you are, it doesn't matter anything. Like you really do have to live fully and participate actively in your life, because up to that point I was just kind of like going with whatever my parents suggested, because I was so sheltered, I was so like in my bubble that I didn't know any better. And that was sort of the wake up moment for me. So on a personal level it happened much sooner, and then gradually over time, like I learned to identify what I wanted to do over a decade. And then with the second story of like what's my role in society as an Asian American child of immigrants, and carrying that weight in a primarily like cisgendered male white industry and environment, that actually happened much later in life. It didn't happen until I started working on a yacht, and this is after my corporate career, and I was like, oh, I want to like start a company. And when I was looking to raise funds, so much of the funding goes to people that look like the VC leaders. And I realized, like, you know what, like a lot of people think that there's only one way to start a company, and it's through funding and whatever. And I realized that, like, again, like we have to come to our own aid sometimes. And I made the decision to save up my own money and raise my own capital. And I was able to start with only like 10 grand, and was able to scale it successfully. And that kind of really taught me that, this story that you need to do things a certain way, or oh, because of my race or like my gender, like things are not possible for me. Like that story I started to let go of, because I thought, oh, I need funding and whatever, but it's really simply just not true.
It's it's a sad state of affairs how a lot of the stories, like the one you just mentioned, particularly about being Asian American, how common they are. I mean, I've just coached someone for a TEDx, and she is Asian Australian, and it sounds like the exact same story. So she went to school, and everybody asks us, "Oh, where are you from?" I was like, "I'm from here," and then they had the 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 advanced English class, which was for the Australians, and they had sort of the whatever they called it, the normal English class, and she got put in the normal English class, and it's just like, but it's my first language. This is what I speak every day. And then she didn't go into startups, but she became a lawyer, and she said that what will usually happen is if she goes into a boardroom and everybody looks at her a bit funny, like, so is this the junior lawyer? Do you have like the white guy coming at some point? And apparently
Oh my gosh,
once they
yes.
actually said, like, someone actually said to her, it's like, she gave the legal opinion, and they said, and they were looking at her funny, and just said, do you guys do you have any questions about the presentation? I said, no, it's just we not usually see lawyers like you. um so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know deeply what that feels like. But with that said, I've somehow found a way to use that to my advantage. And what I mean by that is, because people expect not less of you, but they don't expect it, I guess. I've used that as almost a tool to move forward and then like launch or like achieve success much quicker, because I receive less friction, because they're like, oh, like she's not, like I can't take her seriously, or like whatever the hell it is. Like I don't really care. I'll just go forward. So yeah, there's duality to like every challenge. I think, like, yes, of course, like it creates a bit of challenge. But then when you set the ego aside and the personal like attack and affront aside, there's always an opportunity. And for me, that opportunity was like, I can do whatever I want, and people won't really notice, or people won't really say otherwise. And I know that I'll end up surprising them. So that to me is actually more fun. And I choose to like view that challenge through the lens of like, this is a game and this is fun, rather than like, oh, like they're not expecting this of me. It's not like, oh, I require them to look at me a certain way. Like I think I've kind of moved past that. So yeah, like that's how I am approaching it.
One thing that a lot of people don't necessarily realize, but you've lived through it, and I've lived through it to a smaller extent, is that the stories we tell ourselves have an immense power to affect how we physically feel, not just how we emotionally feel. Because there's this book that I read many years ago, and I don't think I'll ever forget the book. It's called "Why Zebras Don't Have Ulcers." And the theory of the book is very basic, and this was actually revolutionary when it came out, which is simply that stress is not a mental thing. Your body, our bodies have evolved to deal with stress as a short-term occurrence, and anything that causes stress to become a medium or long-term phenomenon in your body is messing up the balance of everything. It's putting all sorts of hormones into the system that are not meant to be there for that long, and that can have real life consequences. So I believe that in your case, you got yourself some ulcers, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely. And there's another book called like The Body Always Keeps Score, which is also about how we internalize stress. And yeah, I experienced exactly what you said firsthand about allowing the stories and the micro traumas and all the stress build up in my body. Even though mentally I was like, I think I'm fine. But on a subconscious level, my body was like, you are not fine. I think it was a way of coping with the story and telling myself like it's fine when it really wasn't, was just a way to adapt and cope with a very stressful situation in my life. And that for me was the moment that I was like, okay, like that was wake up call number two, was like, okay, like I really do need to drive this ship. I kind of fell asleep at the wheel and I need to wake up and like choose something different. And that's why I ended up on a left corporate in New York and ended up on a yacht, because it was, yeah, that new story that I wanted to start creating for myself.
So what I suffered with that was nowhere near as serious, because you ended up being hospitalized more than once, right? So mine didn't get to that point, but when I was much younger, so in the Brazil, which is where I'm from, you have something like, it's not quite like the SATs, because in Brazil, when I was there, you had to choose the career you want to do, and then you apply for the specific university you want to go to, and then there's a big test, and you need to reach a certain score. And as you can imagine, that is sort of nerve wracking, because you can only do that for the public universities, which are the ones that everybody wants to go to, once a year. So if you don't pass, then it's a big problem. And throughout the process of studying for it, I started having abdominal pains and couldn't quite figure out what it was. And then I think I spent 3 or 4 months taking every single exam known to man, and they couldn't find absolutely anything. And then lo and behold, I passed the thing, I got into university, and it slowly faded away. And then I realized, okay, fine, so this is psychosomatic. This is what I termed them my ghost pains. And then every so often since, if there's a lot of stress going on in my life, the same spot starts hurting, and then my wife will look at me and go, the ghost pains? It's like, yeah. And the weird thing, or I don't know if this is good or bad, but I don't always realize that I'm that stressed until they turn up. I mean, it's been quite a while since it happened, but I don't always realize that, oh, I'm going through a lot of stress and maybe I should back off a bit. But then I go, oh, actually, I'm not feeling very. This is not comfortable. So what is going on? Oh yeah, maybe I'm more worried about this thing than I thought I was. So yeah, yeah. And and
Yeah.
but so now I'm gonna get into the stuff you're doing, because this I think is very difficult, right? Because the work you're doing, if we're sticking with the story metaphor, is you're helping people identify the stories that are limiting and change them. How do you do? I guess that people are coming to you, so it's not like you have to go out and sell this concept to them, but how much resistance do you get when you're trying to help them figure that out?
Um, Not much resistance, because the way that I approach it is through asking a lot of questions and specific questions. It requires me to deeply and compassionately listen to their answers and ask the right questions. But generally, it's a process of peeling back the layer of like, but why, but why, but why. And sometimes I'm not sure if you're familiar with design thinking and using the 5 times why to really get to the root of a problem.
Yes,
Sometimes
I call it my daughter's approach.
the daughter method.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So it really kind of drills down into um, what's the story that you're telling yourself, and I always try to say like why do you think that is, and then I ask the same question, kind of going a deeper level, and usually the first three answers are kind of the more surface level bullshit answers, and then the fourth and the fifth are the more true answers, and then my methodology is these stories served a purpose. So it's not about like shoving it away. That's quite violent. It's not about saying like those stories are wrong and they're horrible. You have to cut it out of your life. It's not like that. It's like, okay, like it's kind of like Marie Kondo. You have to like look at it, say thank you for your service, and then release it. So it's the same way. Like you look at where did this belief in the story come from? What role did it play? Usually it's boils down to self-preservation or love or connection. And it makes sense and it protected them for a long time, but it reaches a certain point and they know it. The reason why they come to me is when they're like, oh, it doesn't feel right. Like this is affecting my job, my life, my relationships, my happiness, all of these things. And they're able to identify like, oh, like it did serve a purpose and I do have to say thank you to it. And I was like, yes, but then let's now identify why it's not working for you. So to get them to that self-acceptance that it did serve a purpose and get them to say, yes, I am ready to let it go, because I can't force them to let go of a story.
Mm.
So it's really about having them come to that realization.
Yeah, because the reason I'm saying that this could be complicated or that it could be difficult and asking about resistance is because just yesterday or the day before, I, I might have misspoke on social media, and it was sort of baffling to me that anyone thought that was the case. But it was a super simple situation where someone was being trolled on social media because the person who's my friend, she swears on her posts, and then someone went and wrote this horrendous thing that was very long, whatever, just saying, oh, you're a horrible person, whatever. And my comment to her was something like, because the woman had made some like grammatical errors and was commenting on her English, and like, surely you can't have that good at English if you're swearing, that type of thing. And she had some ideas that from like the 1950s about like being a lady is what she clearly aspired to be. And I said, why would you possibly care about someone who says manners is good, and has the opinions that sound like some sort of Downton Abbey hole that she crawled out from. And I thought we were just kind of mostly trying to be amusing and say like she's a moron. Like, why would you bother? Why would you care? And then someone kicked back, not her, someone else said essentially that I was telling her how to feel, or that I was trying to sort of invalidating her experience. And my answer was, well, no, I don't think I'm. But that's not what I was trying to do, because I think that sometimes people have, the story they're telling themselves about why this matters is not very helpful. And what I was trying to do, perhaps not as tactfully as I could have, is to say, well, you seem bothered by this, but this person clearly is a moron, so that there's no reason to be bothered by this. But then that got me thinking, because I know that with children you don't do that. Like, my daughter falls down and hurts herself, the worst thing I can say is, "Oh, get up, it's nothing." Like that I definitely know I cannot do. But you're talking to grown-ups or supposed grown-ups, and it's clear that what's causing them pain is the story they're telling themselves, is the way they're framing a situation. Is there any way to to sort of help them realize that that might be the case if they haven't gotten to that realization by themselves?
That's a great question, Francisco. And when it comes to people's stories and beliefs, they have to be willing to do like make the change themselves. Just like how you can't force anyone, like I can't force you to do something you don't deeply believe in. Same goes for them. It's like there has to be their choice. So there's nothing that any external pressure can push them that will have long-term changes. You might get them to agree in the short term, but the long term will always default to their layer of their belief system and their values. And this might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually don't believe that there's right truth or wrong truth. I think truth is actually just semantics and a matter of perspective, because how you grew up gave you a certain set of beliefs and values, and how she probably grew up gave her a different set of values and beliefs. And we might be looking at the same mountain, but you're coming up from one side you're like, the mountain's all rocky. And she's like, no, I came up from the south side and everything's smooth. And you're fighting over things based on perspective, but it's the same mountain. So that's why I don't really like to engage in whose perspective is right or whose perspective is wrong, because I just know that they are just simply speaking from their truth or their perspective at that time. That's not to say that it's not going to shift or change. Like as they grow, as experiences happen to them, they learn, they're able to progress. Maybe they move over to the side a little bit and can start to see your perspective more, or maybe you can move to the side and start to see what they're seeing more. So I think it's just a balance of understanding. There is no, like, you're on the same mountain. There's no right or wrong perspective. It's just your perspective at the time. And like having that compassion for yourself and for the other person is actually a skill that I feel like in the day of like trigger culture, where everyone is triggered by everything and they fight, and their natural inclination is to rise to anger. We need more compassion and just 1 second longer to be like, in their moment, their perspective to them feels correct. Just as you swear, your perspective is also correct. So that's something just to kind of keep in mind. And I understand like there's some people who will resist change, but that's their prerogative. Just as how if I made you do something different that you don't want to do, you're like, no, I will never do that. So
Yeah, my example is perhaps not even the best one, because the best example would be when you are, in a sense, trying to help someone in your mind, but they don't want to be helped or they don't see it the same way. This case, I think my friend was absolutely fine. The person that had a massive issue was someone else who thought, and then you start getting into gender discussions, and is then automatically assume, or at least she seemed to assume, that because I'm a man and I'm talking to a woman, that has to do with why I'm telling her how to feel or whatever. It's like, no, I'll say the exact same thing to my friends, my male friends. I would say, mate, what are you doing? He's a moron. Why are you bothered about this? But I do worry about that, because although I'm not necessarily agree that there is no truth, I think when it comes to feelings, every time it's all subjective. I think there is objective truth. But my concern is when it comes to the fact that someone is suffering, I don't think is usually deniable or subjective. I think it's clear someone is suffering. And as a parent, I worry about this. And as a husband, I've worried as well. My wife is torturing herself over something, and I can't fix the thing that's causing it, but I can help her see it in a different way. And if I do that, the problem goes away. But at what point, if the person hasn't come to you and say, I think the way this is holding me back. Can you help me reframe it? Are we ever okay to try and make that happen if they haven't clearly asked for it? And I don't know.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is no. Like, they're never going to be willing to truly listen if they didn't give you explicit permission, which is like kind of the benefit of my work. I'm not going out there, I'm not preaching. Like, like my approach is like, I'm just going to share what I know. And if you want to learn more of like how I can specifically help you, you are doing the work, you are giving me permission to help you. There's this like like phrase that's one of my friends who's a coach was like, don't coach without permission. And that's so true, because then it becomes more about me, like trying to be a savior or whatever. And I don't really believe in the savior mentality, because I think everyone's an adult and like a human being capable of making their own decisions. So unless they ask me for help, I'm not going to give my advice. I will always ask questions to kind of clarify, help them clarify, but I'm not going to coach them or like give them like a solution. I know that's like instinctually for me, when I look at my past, like I'm very much like an engineering brain. I was like, there's a problem, there's a solution, there's a problem, solution. But then what the missing piece was, am I solving a problem, quote unquote problem, that they never asked you to solve? So that's the key differentiation, is like sometimes 90% of the time people, when they're saying to you like, this is what's going on, they just want to be heard. And when it comes to my coaching clients, they ask explicitly to help me with this. Usually when it's a friend or a family member just venting, I have to catch myself to not coach without permission and just allow them to just ask questions and just to be heard.
Yeah, I think that's amazing advice. Where I think that advice becomes complicated to follow is when it comes to parenting.
Yes, like with the issue of parenting, I can't really speak for parents because I am not one. But
But probably
yeah.
that probably just means you have more clarity than we do.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I might think very differently when I have
Mm.
children of my own, and all of this advice will go out the window.
Yeah.
But that will be a new perspective when I get there. But for now, this is my perspective.
Yeah, I think one trap that a lot of parents fall into, and I'm trying to crawl out of it, is that we genuinely think that we can influence who our children are. We can't. We can make it easier or harder for them to become who they are. We can definitely influence things like manners, and we can instill some good habits and things like that. But you're not going to make a shy child become an extrovert. You're not going to make a non-musical child become musical. But when it comes to things like for example, this is the silliest example, but I think it's relevant because she was suffering for it. Some kid in her class told her she was slow, and it wasn't the first time. She was told that she was slow, and I don't know, she prides herself in being really fast, and she loves running around. And she was really bothered by this. And I'm like, okay, well, this is clearly a silly thing to be upset about. I understand why she's upset. What tools can I give a 4.5-year-old to maybe make her slightly? And I said, well, you are slower than me, but you're a lot faster than your mom. And she's like, yeah, but you're just trying to find something you can give them. Um, and with grown-ups, and I get, I get the whole coaching without permission, but it is difficult, I think, at times to see friends or family when they have been suffering for this because of the same story for a very long time, and that, like, if there was any way that they could just see it from a different angle, that all that pain can either go away or at least become a lot less of an issue. Um, but you're right. I don't know if there is a way to not force it on people, but to be more sort of outbound with that, other than inbound. So, and I have an example, a terrible example of the whole coaching without permission thing in the type of thing you do. There was this person I've spoken to on LinkedIn a couple of times, and we always seem to get sort of aggressive with each other and get into an argument or whatever. And he's a life coach, and so the last time we spoke, it was something like, I don't know. I think I offered some help with content because I thought his content, which could be fantastic, was not that great. It's like, listen, I have some ideas. If you want to listen to them, let me know. And then he started just telling me a whole bunch of stuff about my life, and it's like, are you doing this? Are you doing that? I'm like, I'm not sure I want to get into this conversation. And then very quickly it devolved into him basically telling me off if I haven't, if I'm not doing what I'm meant to be doing, and this is not supporting my family and blah blah, then I'm not living my life to the fullest or whatever. And it's just like that coming from someone when you haven't asked. is just horrendous. There's no way that would ever work. Guilt someone into
Exactly.
changing their life. To
Exactly. Yeah. Because I think from his perspective, he probably made some assumptions through his lens and he was like, oh, he's suffering. But that might not be the case for you. Just as when you observe people who you're like, oh, I can clearly see from my angle they're suffering, but they may not see it. And also, I always ask, what are they gaining from staying stuck? Because they always gain something. If it wasn't beneficial to them in some way, they wouldn't still remain that way. It would be like, when you hit rock bottom, you're like, holy hell, I need to get myself out of here. But if you don't make that realization, that means you're still benefiting in some sick way. You're still benefiting, right? You can still play the victim role. And maybe they like that because it brings them connections, or maybe they act like they are incapable and so it never pushes them. They don't have to actually try hard, or they tell themselves they can never do what you do and that they can stay small because they're happy, they're comfortable, but they're afraid to admit it or whatever. So you just always have to assume that they are in the position that they actually want to be in, unless they expressly ask for it. Because think about it. Most people, if they're in a situation they don't want to be in, they either get themselves out or look for people to help them get out. Very rarely are you
or they
stuck.
moan a lot.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. It's like if they want to moan a lot, but don't. You've noticed there's some people who just like to complain, but don't
Yeah,
have any
they're
intention.
called the British.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah, the whinging palms is like the saying.
Yes, yes.
But
Well, no,
yeah,
but I think
but
what you're missing in that analysis is that he saw right through me, and I was being hypocritical and not willing to live my life to the fullest. Oh yeah, we get a lot of this on social media, like people that will ask you questions like, so how's the year going? How's the business? And then what challenges are you facing? And they're trying to getting you into some sort of coaching conversation that as soon as you give them any rope, then they try to hang you with it and go, oh well, if so yeah, not I fully agree that the coaching without permission is very good, a very good idea. So on more specifically on how you do that, because there's the questioning process, so you're trying to find what's limiting people. I would expect that a lot of those sessions get somewhat emotional and get somewhat childhood traumas and things of that nature coming out. But once you've done that, so once it's come out, once you've sort of been able to identify, okay, well, maybe this is why I'm doing this thing or I'm thinking this thing, what comes next? So how do you go from, okay, I know what the problem is, to actually trying to move away from that story into a better one?
yeah, that's a good question. So I have different exercises to sort of fortify it. It's almost like when you have an infection, that's like the negative story that's harming you. You, instead of like putting more band-aids on it, you have to kind of cut it open and let it breathe, and then we learn to stitch it and heal it. So how that process works is like the initial like cutting is going to feel quite painful, and you're going to let a lot of the anger, the sadness, these emotions out. And then we go about the process using our intuition, using our mind, like logic. That's something that most people feel comfortable with. But then it's also important to understand how it affects like your spirit and like what brings you that like childhood joy. And what I do is I have them look at like, okay, like what values do you have currently? Because the values that you had in the past when you first created that story might be very different. And so how can we use that as a tool to then choose a new story that's actually aligned with the values that you live day in and day out today? And then another way that I approach it is like, okay, let's go deeper into looking at that childhood moment, because this is a pattern. I do believe in patterns and cycles. So it's like, if you feel this way now, chances are very high that you have felt this way in the past. Let's look at your pattern, your growth pattern. Where have you been stuck in the past, and how did you move forward successfully in the past cycle? Another way that I like teach people is like, hey, like, let's look at replacing it. So if you take something away, like you have to replace it, but what do you replace it with? What's that new story? So the new story is rooted in your values and also rooted in the things that you actually do want for yourself, not the things that you don't want for yourself. They're like, oh, I don't want something that, like, I don't want to feel stressed. I was like, don't talk about what you don't want, talk about what you do want. They're like, okay, I want more calm, I want more peace, I want whatever. And it's like really getting them to emotionally connect to a future that they do want, and then making the backward logical steps to get them there, rather than thinking with only your brain and saying like, I want to do this, or I want to accomplish this, because that is like a symptom of the underlying cause, which is they're hoping that it brings them like the happiness, the calm, the joy, the whatever. So it's important that you actually identify the underlying cause that you want for yourself on an emotional level. Then your subconscious brain can work to push you towards that path. And I help organize and like say, okay, so like what's the first step? What's the middle step? What's that goal plan look like on a practical level based on that emotional state you're trying to get to? So it's about pulling out some of that negative story, replacing it, saying thank you for your service, moving it aside, and then identifying clearly, okay, this is what I want. This is how I want to feel. And these are the steps that I am willing to take, that I want to take because it feels fun. There's a healthy amount of fear. I'm excited about it, and I'm intellectually stimulated by it, because I think there are 5 key things that you need to move forward and replace your story. Any new path forward, I call it like the grief model. G is like, is there an opportunity for growth? Because as human beings, we always like to up level and learn and grow. And R, do you have the resources, like whether it's money, time, even the energy, to do this new path? I is intellectual. Are you interested in it? Are you intellectually stimulated? Is your mind excited about this? E is for emotion and excitement. Like you have to feel it in your body, like, eek, like I can't wait to do this. It's like when you're a kid and you play with a new toy, you're like, wake up first thing in the morning because you're like, you want to play with that new toy. And then the final thing is F, because I think healthy amount of fear is important, because if without that, you're bored. So that's the methodology that I use to help people identify that new story.
Because the way you do this is usually through retreats, right? I'm sure you call
I
them
do.
retreats, but they would.
Yeah, so I call them virtual retreats. So I used to do them in person,
Yes.
but their in-person experiences are very different. So Reboot as a whole has the mission of connection in 3 key areas, like to yourself, your greater mission, and other people. So think of like the in-person experiences, like 70% of it is about like connecting with other people and like you're experiencing things and it's really fun. And then 30% of it is like connecting to yourself and your mission. So the virtual programs are the opposite, where majority of the group sessions are about connecting much deeper into who you are and yourself. And then about 30% of it is like connecting with others. So it's kind of like the focus is slightly different, but the overarching mission is the same. So yeah, I do it in like group settings.
The reason I was asking about that is because one question I had is how sticky that process is, because a lot of the things you're talking about to a great extent are therapy, right? We can call it whatever we want, we can spin it as storytelling, but to a great extent it's arguably more therapy than coaching. And so this was the question, because I didn't get a feeling from what I found out about your work that you are talking to these people once a week for the rest of their lives. So how easy or not it is to relapse into some of those old stories without some sort of continuous follow-up or continuous reinforcement.
Yeah, that's a great question. How I set it up is I initially like set the intention and the tone that I am not going to be their only teacher, because then that creates a weird dynamic where they rely on me, and I don't think that type of relationship is healthy for their long-term growth. It's not about like, oh, listen to me, I'm the only one with the answers. That's why I love working in groups, so that they connect with these other amazing human beings in the same cohort who are going through the same things, who are willing to listen, and they help each other out. So during the program, yes, like I'm guiding them through the process, but I'm certainly not the only teacher. And in fact, by the end, I do like an integration session with each of them, and I assign them, with permission, of course, because I kind of like watch how people interact, and I can usually tell like who has chemistry to support each other, either similar minded or complementary. And so I connect those two, and I'm like, you have your accountability partner. And as an experiment for the next year, I want you to check in with each other at minimum once a month. And they're like, sweet. So then they have one other person who understands their story, who understands their challenges, to bounce ideas off of and connect with, even without me being involved. So I think it's really important to give them the tools that they can implement on their own. And that's why like all of my like coaching, like I call them exercises because it's meant to be practice. They can access them whenever they want. And whenever they're having a moment of like, I'm really challenged by this, I'm like, hey, remember that module on fear? Like, go revisit that. Or like, hey, I'm making a hard decision. I was like, oh, remember that decision-making matrix? Like, go visit that, you know? So it's like they have all the tools and they do continuously come back. And even after like 3 years, someone's now on their second business. She's like, hey, I dusted off the old exercises now. And like, it's still very helpful. So it's nice to know that it's always a tool to use.
I have a feeling that once we're out of the madness that we're living through with the pandemic and all, and the physical retreats, the physical experiences become a thing again, a lot of these people are going to go, oh, I think I need to reboot again. I think, where is it this year? Are you doing it in Bali again? I think I really need a couple of weeks there again. I mean, the exercise is not cutting it for me.
I think it's important to have both because you want that connection, you know, you want to have fun. I believe in being more joyful with this process of understanding yourself because I think so much of the coaching industry and I guess therapy, I mean, I'm not a therapist. I just think I've been through a lot of shit in my life that makes me like think of a certain way. But I think a lot of people, sorry, I just like lost my train of thought there.
A lot of people
But yeah,
like the retreats in paradise
oh
locations.
yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people are attracted to that because they're like, oh, it's so fun and you know, like why not? It's like a vacation. And the reason why I think that is actually a good thing is because a lot of the coaching industry is very serious and very heavy, and so is therapy. And I think it's missing a key part of human existence, which is joy, play, fun. And you know, in-person experiences allow for that. I mean, I've been experimenting with some virtual sessions as well to be more joyful and silly and fun. Like we do like virtual like movement and dance and like drawing parties and all of these things to keep more of that playful energy. But it's much easier, if I'm being honest, much easier in person to be like basically like running around like kids, like playing hide and seek, you know, and that joyfulness is also important to human growth.
Yeah, and I think that I haven't developed this thought particularly well, but what you are doing, I think a lot of people would consider sort of the what you're doing personally is sort of the cliche of I'm gonna go find myself. I'm gonna live in different parts of the world. It's gonna always gonna be a beach. It's never gonna be well, it could be the Tibet, but normally it's a warm place. And I think that to some people that there I can imagine that could be the risk that some people are attracted by the concept of what they're going to this super beautiful place to do, but a part of them is thinking, well, I'm going to paradise either. So I'm spending a week there and there'll be some exercise, there'll be some stuff. And I think that what we're going through now forces the focus back on what the actual work is. The only real question, which I'm sure you have a better answer in a year or two, is does the real work, uh, is it more effective if you have to force it, if it's virtual, right? So if it's not, you don't get all the community and all the other things you would get more easily in person, does it make the real work you're trying to do more effective or less? And I think it might just be different for some people, where some people we will need that to get into that headspace to do it. And some people are like, well, if I'm there, I'm enjoying the beach and everything out. I'm putting up with this stuff. So
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that because during the pandemic, like a lot of people, we went virtual. But it's so funny because I've actually had the idea to do a virtual cohort like this for years. But you know, obviously planning like 4 or 5 retreats a year, it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy. So I never had the moment. So when the COVID hit, I was like, okay, well now is good a time as any. And what I found was it is actually more effective working across 10 weeks, like a much longer period of time, to develop slowly these deeper relationships with the members of the cohort, to unpack things. Because I think there is a little bit of an integration time where if you learn something new, you kind of have to think about it on your own, practice it on your own, let it sink in before you rush off to the next exercise, right?
Yep.
So there's much more of a step-by-step approach that feels much more solid. So I've noticed a much more long-term benefit. So the people who've gone through the cohort now, like coming up on over a year now, I'm now on my 8th cycle. And the people at the very start and where they are now, from the very first cohort to where they are now, is completely different in such an amazing way. Like many started their own businesses, many like up-leveled in their own unique way, moved countries, whatever. But that's cool to watch versus like the in-person experiences are only like a week, and there's only so much you can do, given like there's also things to do. There's a lot of distractions and it's really fun and it's joyful. So I think moving forward, how I'm going to leverage the power of in-person connection and joy with the impact of these longer term, more intentional programs virtually, is to have the virtual experience first, because like it has to start with you. Give that space to explore yourself first. And then what naturally happens is by the end, they're like, I can't wait to meet all of you guys in person. And then we do like a retreat.
Yes,
So I think that's
I think
key
the
to it.
British will call that, you do the work and then you get a piss up after the work.
Yeah, exactly.
Celebrate the
Have a
work
little, exactly,
by getting a bit rowdy with everyone else. Uh,
exactly,
Listen, I think the surf is just about up where you are, and
exactly.
and the time to go get my kid from school, the kid I should try not to indoctrinate too much with my own ideas, is also coming up. So if people want to find out more about the work you're doing, what's the best place to do that?
Um, Definitely Instagram. If they want to check out Reboot experiences, or the Hana Jung is my personal. It's HANAJUNG, the Hana Jung. And I do a lot of like little mini workshops on there, and I share a lot of helpful content. It's just really meant to nourish your growth. So that's the best way to reach me. And obviously the website, rebootexperiences.com.
Perfect. I'll put all that on the show notes, and I'll be glad to tell Brian that he was right to to annoy us to do this. So again, thank you very much for your time today, Hannah.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Francisco.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.